Hello and welcome back to another very special bonus episode of the Evolution of Horror. Now, usually you'll get a new episode every Friday and we would be continuing our series on the evolution of the ghost story. But this is a very special bonus episode that I'm putting out because this week sees the UK release of a brand new, fantastic genre movie called Revenge. And I was lucky enough to sit down and speak to the director of the movie, Coralie Fargeat, and its star, the brilliant Matilda Lutz. So I wanted the chance to play you a little bit of my conversation with Coralie and Matilda. The movie, for those of you who haven't yet heard of it, is this fantastic, gritty, visceral, exploitational sort of rape revenge movie. Now, I'm not usually a fan of the kind of rape revenge movie, especially those ones from the 70s, such as I Spit on Your Grave or Straw Dogs or Last House on the Left or any of those. Never really been a huge fan of those movies, but this movie is really well made. It's really interesting and it's super fun. And I know I'm getting a little bit tired of having to keep mentioning this whenever it happens, but it's only because it's still a noteworthy thing and we've got to talk about it. The fact that it has a female director and having a female eye behind the camera on a movie with content such as this is very important and it makes a huge difference. This movie has got a lot to say about gender politics, about rape culture, victim blaming, the Me Too movement, loads of stuff going on at the moment. I mean, it couldn't be more timely in a number of ways. But aside from all that, it's a brilliantly, expertly made horror exploitation movie, one that is so full of gore and extreme violence. And in this day and age, when most of the horror movies that come out in mainstream cinema are movies like It, Ghost Stories, or something directed by James Wan, it's really nice to see something a bit gritty, a bit grungy, a bit grotesque, but also with something a bit clever to say. So suffice to say, I absolutely loved this movie, and I got to sit down and have a little chat with Coralie and Matilda, the director and the star. Now, just so you know, we do stay away from spoilers, although there may be a few minor plot spoilers and reveals here and there, but it's nothing that's going to ruin the experience for you. So, you're going to hear a little bit of the trailer, followed by my conversation with them. Enjoy! Coralie and Matilda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
First of all, congratulations on the movie. Your debut feature, Coralie, absolutely incredible debut. Again, for people listening to this who don't know anything about this movie, give us a little bit of the plot rundown, first of all. Set up the story for us.
Yes, it's basically a revenge movie where a girl whose name is Jen, who is the perfect Lolita, very sexy and seductive girl, is gonna be in a trouble situation with three guys who are going for hunting in a very beautiful villa that is isolated in a desert. And things are gonna go out of hand, and basically she is gonna chase them into the desert. So here for the basic plot.
Wonderful, yeah, and we don't want to spoil too much, but it sort of escalates from there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Matilda, when was the first time you sort of heard about this project, and what were your initial reactions when you read the script and you read this character?
I first met Coralie in Los Angeles, and I had met her agent that basically emailed me and said, I have a client who's coming to LA to meet girls for her next feature. So you should meet. And that's how we met. And I hadn't read the script yet. But it felt like I knew her. We talked for hours and just like chatting about everything. And then I auditioned the first time in her hotel room because she was leaving for Paris. So I went, I think at like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And I was like crawling on the floor and, you know, doing all the, I think like the branch scene was like the main.
Oh my God.
On the floor in the hotel room, pretending to have a branch like up my stomach, basically. So that was my first approach to the script.
Wow.
But I remember just like being so fascinated by the character and by the fact of playing two extremes in one film, which it doesn't happen in general. And even more to me, because I've always been seen like the nice next door type of girl. So it was really just challenging to me to like get to play something like that.
Yeah, you got to kind of subvert that, I suppose, didn't you, midway through, which is really nice. Were you ever worried? I mean, this is it's quite a brutal rape revenge movie. I mean, were you ever worried? Were you ever trepidatious about going into a project like this?
I think I've never been worried in a way. I think I trusted her, and for some reason I felt like it was the right project to take on.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't even realize how difficult it was going to be shooting it, which I did after on set. But at the same time, it was kind of like so fun and so different every scene, and so challenging, either emotionally or physically, that it never felt like it was the wrong project to be in. It was just difficult but fun as well. And I got to learn so many things that I didn't do before on a set, which was basically like guns and some action, stunt scenes, and also like the fact of playing with the voice that was much like airier than my voice, and also like the fact of just like transforming physically in two different characters. And I think the physical part of acting, like changing your hair and your makeup and your whole like body basically behavior, does really give something to you to play. So it was a lot of fun to do it.
We kind of find out very little about Matilda, really. Did she kind of seems at the beginning like a bit of a sort of blank slate? I mean, did you guys kind of talk about a bit about who this woman actually is and what her background was and where she came from before this point?
We never talked about background specifically. We talked about her in general as a character, and in the casting process, we were talking about it and creating the character, and she would tell me specifically what she thought about the character, but never like a background story, I would say. And I think it's because she's so far away, both sides from what I show in my life.
Yeah.
I really got to like play with being free and letting go, and just like trying to like create an experience on set. And I remember sometimes like going to the extreme, and she would tell me sometimes like bring it down a little bit, or the opposite. So it was just like a very good creative process.
Coralie, so what inspired you to want to tell this story?
I think I'm very fascinated by the Lolita character, which I think represent a lot of all the images that can be projected onto a woman. Because I think it's this character is going to bring a lot of violence on her, because at the beginning she's very playful and sexy and seductive, and totally assumes the way that she wants to be looked at and she wants to be liked. And the problem comes that because of that, those guys are gonna, project on her the fact that they can do whatever they want, and that they can get rid of her very easily, and that nobody's gonna care, as if she was worth nothing,
Yeah.
And so I think this is very emblematic of, the way women can be perceived, and all the things they have to, to think about beside of just being themselves. They have to think about the image they're going to project, what, how they're going to be perceived, how they're going to be looked at. And I think all this for me in a way took shape into this character that I wanted to be at the extreme of the very Lolita, Barbie girl who is totally at ease with her body, but is going to provoke and create problematic interpretations from the guys. And I like the idea that this character was gonna free herself from any gaze that, and any authorization or any, that she's going to find the power within herself to just need herself to be powerful and to exist, and she doesn't need anymore that other people look at her to be strong and to find her place on earth. And I wanted to play with all those symbols that I think are very crucial nowadays. They have always been very crucial, and it was my way of talking about these important issues.
The way that you shoot Matilda, especially in the first half of the movie, it does feel like you're kind of playing with the idea of the male gaze. There are these shots of her that are, basically lots of shots of, certain parts of her anatomy. She's very scantily clad, and like you say, she's playing with that image of this Lolita, this promiscuous girl, and it brings up all those kind of really interesting arguments. Obviously there are certain male characters in the movie that say, look, you brought this on yourself because of the way you acted, etc. But I just wondered whether or not you were deliberately subverting the idea of the male gaze and this genre that we're all familiar with, the rape revenge genre, which is very controversial and tends to have a lot of problems. There are a lot of movies in the 70s like this, I Spit on Your Grave and Straw Dogs and these types of movies, mostly directed by men, that often lend a kind of leery gaze on the female characters. Was that anything that you were sort of deliberately channeling?
I haven't seen I Spit on Your Grave. I haven't watched the rape and revenge traditional movies of the 70s. It was not those inspiration that rooted the project, but more in fact revenge movies that were giving birth to a very strong hero, such as Kill Bill or Rambo or Mad Max, and all together with constructing a very powerful scenery and a very powerful, phantasmagoric world. And that's what I really wanted, to escape the mere horror realism and go for something else, give a very metaphorical and operatic touch to the whole stuff, and in a way to bring it somewhere else than just the event in itself, because the rape for me is just one element, the most extreme and shocking maybe of all other kind of violence that she is victim of, psychological, verbal, so my inspirations were more towards those movies were centered about a very strong hero that is taking shape little by little.
Yeah, it kind of feels like there's that moment midway through when she's sort of reborn almost and becomes something entirely different.
Exactly, yeah.
Were you ever concerned about how to portray the rape? I mean, there's been a lot of conversations in film and TV recently about how rape should be portrayed, whether it should be shown, whether it shouldn't. Should you go too brutal with it? Should you underplay it? There's problems on both sides.
Yeah, I of course question myself a lot about it, because it's a pretty sensitive subject and matter, and I think it really depends on the kind of movie you're making, but more of all on what the movie is about. I mean, for me, for instance, in a movie I love, I think is very strong, such as Irreversible.
Yeah.
The rape is really the story. It's the center of the movie. The movie is basically how a rape is going to destroy a couple, how a rape is going to ruin happiness. So I think if you go for that, you have to be brutal and violent in what you're going to show and create a very powerful, as much as cinematic way to show it. And the fact that it's one sequence shot, from afar, but there is no cut, is a very strong, artistic way, I think, of depicting the violence of the act in itself and serve the movie. For Revenge, it was a total different situation, because for me the rape was not at all the center of the movie. The first idea never came with the rape in itself, but more about the journey of the character and all different form of violence that she had to endure, and the rape was just one element of it. And I wanted the rape to be symbolical of every other kind of violence. So I deliberately wanted to keep the rape out of frame, to be more symbolical of a general violence toward this woman. And I think the other forms of violence that you see before, with the guy in the room basically telling her that she is responsible for what's going to happen, and that she created, the situation, is as violent as the scene in itself. And it's the same thing for the guy who witnesses, the scene and doesn't do anything and just run away. And those are, I think, for this movie, even more violent in a psychological way and in a symbolical way than showing the rape in itself. Because for me it was not the tone of the movie, and it was not the center of the movie. So that was my thought about how I wanted to do it.
Yeah, and presuming when you were first sort of writing this and filming it, all the Harvey Weinstein news and the Me Too movement and everything hadn't happened yet. Is that right? I mean, you weren't aware of that when you were making the film. Do you think that this has become, has this given this movie an extra layer, an extra meaning now sort of seeing it today?
Well, I think definitely the timing when the movie is released is striking with the actuality, but I think that everything that was revealed in the Weinstein story already existed, even if it was not revealed. And the worst being that many of these women had talked and had said what had happened to them, but nobody was concerned and really cared, and nobody really listened. But I think when you are a woman, of course, you are more careful to, all those situations, and you are yourself taught in a way that you have to, organize yourself differently, taking care of and be careful to things guys doesn't have to care about, And so all this brings a sensibility to the matter that is, of course, very present. So for me it's kind of a great coincidence, that the Weinstein story was revealed so little time after, because I think both the movie and the actuality can help each other, putting on the table such an important matter. And I think it's always very special when art meets reality and actuality, and it's a kind of a magical thing you cannot predict, and you even don't expect, but I think it's something happens when it happens.
Matilda, what was this shoot like for you then? I mean, it looked like it must have been pretty grueling at times. What were some of the sort of biggest challenges for you when filming this?
The whole film was pretty tough. The location was really hard to shoot in, because we were basically in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and it was very, very cold. Even if it doesn't look so cold.
It was cold, was it? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was pretty tough. We had no comforts whatsoever. But I think it gave something to the character in the film as well, because you can kind of like play with the survival, instinct you get.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of blood as well in this movie. A fantastic amount of blood. This is, I mean, because you've just done Rings as well. So, this is another kind of horror genre movie for you. Are you a big fan of the horror genre?
I'm not the type of person who goes to see horror films. I'm very sensitive. And even though, like, for example, now watching Revenge doesn't really, like, it doesn't scare me because I know what happened, and obviously, like, I've seen it many times now. But it's still, like, the other day I saw a screening in LA, and the night of I had nightmares, and I woke up, like, very, anxious, and so it still does, like, something to me. That said, I think it's one of the most fun type of film to shoot, because you get to do things that you never get to do in life. And also, like, on set, it's really hard to do those type of things. It's not something that happens very often. So it is very fun to just, like, get to, like, do crazy stuff. Yeah. It's liberating.
I can imagine. Yeah. Coralie, were you, was this always a decision to kind of have as much blood and keep it as visceral as possible?
From the writing, I knew that the very specific interest of the film would be its visceral look and would be its visceral touch. And I, from the writing, thought a lot about the visual, the sounds, the use of violence, and I knew I didn't want it to go really towards horror, but much more in a way, I would say, when violence is used in a kind of artistic way or creative way, where there is a filter with reality, because you can bring it so far that it becomes kind of unreal or surreal or totally operatic, and for this you have to go far and to not be afraid to be on the edge of the grotesque. And I think when you manage to go there, it really brings some kind of madness that I think put a filters where you can escape pain or discomfort, and be in a very kind of a trip, kind of a hypnotic, crazy ride the audience is going to ride in, even for those who are not fans of violence or of blood.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very, in the screening I was in, people were shielding their eyes, and then everyone was laughing and enjoying it as well. I suppose is it tricky for you? Was it tricky for you to balance that tone to kind of keep it grotesque but also fun?
I think for me the humor together with violence are two very complementary strengths, because it's, for me, what makes violence bearable and what makes it a creation and an artistic object rather than just a very atrocious experience. So in movies I like, such in South Korean movies, for instance, Old Boy or I Saw the Devil or Tarantino movies, there is this kind of excess, where it's violent, it's bloody, it's sometimes shocking, but it's always there is this kind of black humor on the way that allow you to be entertained at the same time and laugh with the characters, laugh about the characters, about their craziness, about their weaknesses, about all the stupid things they're gonna do, and that gonna create even more blood and more stuff. And it's something I really think is powerful when you deal with those trends. Yeah.
So you wouldn't class Revenge as a horror movie specifically, then?
No, in fact, not at all.
Interesting.
No, for me, it's more kind of a Tarantino or revenge film that is not horror. It's violent, it's bloody, but it's not horror.
And how's it been, since you've been showing it to audiences then and seeing it with members of the public, and how they've reacted?
Well, it's been really great. In fact, the movie premiered in Toronto in September, and I knew with the first, public screening that we had reached something, because the reactions were really amazing. The audience was really living, the film there. because I think it's a very entertaining film at the same time, and people loved the ride. They loved, to let themselves go to this crazy ride and have fun as well as experimenting a very visceral, experience. And so now the movie is going to be released in a lot of countries. So that's great to be able to reach all these audience.
It was so much fun to watch something that was this visceral as well and grotesque. I mean, do you think that it feels like there's been a lack of that in genre movies recently? Do you agree? And if so, why do you think that is?
Well, yeah, I think it's ability to let yourself totally go and trust yourself as, expressing your creativity and your own craziness.
Yeah.
And I think it can be a difficult balance to find, because you can be afraid of how it's going to be received, and it's more comfortable, to navigate within the lines you're used to see, rather than create a new path that you don't know how it's going to be perceived. But for me, the cinematic experience is made about that, about creating your own path and creating your own vision and your own way of telling a story and telling an atmosphere and a universe. But it's really a matter of faith, of abandoning yourself to who you are, to your vision, and trust it, and trust the audience in its ability to receive it and to enjoy it. So, but you never know in the end.
Yeah, wonderful. Final question for you both, which I ask everyone because this is a horror podcast. Do you have a favourite horror movie? In which case, what is it?
I love very much The Fly from Cronenberg.
Yeah. It's another grotesque.
Yeah. And it's going very far in the transformation and in the very simple but powerful symbols and images. And yeah, it's a movie I really love.
Fantastic. Matilda, what about you? You said you're not great with horror, but do you have a favourite?
I remember two films that I watched when I was a kid, which one was like The Exorcist, and the other one was Halloween 20 anni dopo. I don't know.
Oh.
Halloween 20 years later.
Oh, yeah. H2.
And I don't know if it's a good horror film, but I just remember like this leg being like basically chopped from the elevator.
Yeah.
And it was like, I still remember. That's the only scene I remember, but and I was very little, so that's what
that'll stay with you, definitely. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there you have it. That was my chat with the brilliant Coralie Fargeat and Matilda Lutz. A huge thank you to those guys once again for taking the time to come and chat to me for the podcast. Such a treat. Now, have you seen Revenge yet? If you have, get in touch with me. Let me know your thoughts. I mean, do you agree that this isn't at all a horror movie? Because I'm not sure I 100% agree with Coralie. I mean, I know she's the director, but what do directors know? I would say it's definitely got a lot of horror movie tropes. What do you think? Get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or you can tweet me at evolutionpod, or share your review of the movie and your thoughts with me and other listeners of the podcast in the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group that can be found on Facebook. So thank you so much for listening. Normal business will resume on Friday. Stay tuned for part 18 of the evolution of the ghost story, where I'll be joined by Brad Hanson and we will be discussing some of the best and most underrated ghost story gems that have come out over the last 25 years. So stay tuned for all of that and more on the evolution of horror.